Hello, it's Ms. Nicole of Legacy Lineage Online Learning in collaboration with Youth on Fire to present Storytime. We will be reading Ruby the Copycat, another selection in the social emotional learning. I haven't sang the story song in a while, so I'm going to sing it again. I don't want people to forget the story song, little ones. So here we go. I am reading, look at me. Look at me, time to put the toys away and listen to what I say. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. This is the front of the book. It tells you the title, the author, and the illustrator. This is the back of the book. It tells you that it's the end. And this is the spine. Parents, where are your children's spine? This is the front of the book. The title of this story is Ruby the Copycat. And I see that there's only one name on the front, so she must be the author who wrote the words and the illustrator who drew the pictures, Peggy Rathman. This is the back of the book. It tells me that it's the end. And this is the spine, and it holds the pages of the book together, just like the spine in our body holds all our body parts, our limbs together. All right, Ruby the Copycat. And I see two girls here, and they are dressed the same. I need to be able to see if you guys can see good. Okay, so they are dressed the same, and they have the same bow in their hair, and let's find out if there's something more to that. Ruby the Copycat. Monday was Ruby's first day in Mrs. Hart's class. Class, this is Ruby, announced Mrs. Hart. Ruby, you may use the empty desk behind Angela. Angela is the girl with the pretty red bow in her hair. Angela smiled at Ruby, and Ruby smiled at Angela's bow and tiptoed to her seat. I hope everyone had a pleasant weekend, said Miss Hart. Does anyone have something special to share? I was a flower girl at my sister's wedding, said Angela. That's exciting, said Miss Hart. Ruby raised her hand halfway. I was a flower girl at my sister's wedding, too. What a coincidence, said Miss Hart. Angela turned and smiled at Ruby, and Ruby smiled at the top of Angela's head. Class, please take your reading books out, said Mrs. Hart. So maybe because they have something in common, they may be friends. Let's see. At lunchtime, Ruby hopped all the way home on one foot. When Ruby came back to school, she was wearing a red bow in her hair. She slid into her seat behind Angela. I like your bow, whispered Angela. I like yours too, whispered Ruby. Class, please take out your math books, said Miss Hart. On Tuesday morning, Angela wore a sweater with daisies on it. At lunchtime, Ruby hopped home sideways. When Ruby came back to school after lunch, she was wearing a sweater with daisies on it. I like your sweater, whispered Angela. I like yours too, whispered Ruby. And let's look at what they're doing in art. I noticed that they are painting a picture. We can't really see Angela's picture, but do you notice something about Ruby's picture? What does her picture look like? Does it look like anything else we see on that page? And there she is with her purple sweater, just like Angela's. Or is it? On Wednesday, Angela wore a hand-painted t-shirt with matching sneakers. After lunch, Ruby hopped backwards to school wearing a hand-painted t-shirt with matching sneakers. Why are you sitting like that? Whispered Angela. Wet paint, said Ruby. So let's just look at this picture and see. She's dressed just like her. On Thursday morning during share time, Angela modeled the flower girl dress she wore at her sister's wedding. Ruby modeled her flower girl dress too, right after lunch. Angela didn't whisper anything. How do you think Angela's beginning to feel? She thought she met someone who she had something in common with, and now it seems like they share everything. By coincidence, on Friday morning, both girls wore a red and lavender striped dress. At lunchtime, Angela raced home. But let's look at Angela. Let's look at her face. Let's look at how she's feeling. Let's look at a little closer. I don't know. How do you think she's feeling? And let's look at her down here as she's running. Does she look like she's happily running or kind of frustrated in her run? Let's find out what happens. When Angela came back to school, she was wearing black. Sometimes colors emit feelings. They say we feel a certain way. I wonder what Angela's saying about how she's feeling wearing that black dress. And if you look at her, she's telling us with her body language, like her head is kind of down, and I notice on her face, her mouth is kind of turned downward. Let's look at her a little closer. Her behavior is communicating something to Ruby. On Friday afternoon, Miss Hart asked everyone to write a short poem. Who would like to read first? Asked Miss Hart. Angela raised her hand. She stood by her desk and read, I had a cat I could not see because it stayed in back of me. It was a very loyal pet. It's sad we never really met. That was very good, said Miss Hart. Now, who's next? Miss Hart looked around the room. Ruby? Ruby stood and recited slowly. I had a nice pet who I never met because it always stayed behind me, and I'm sure it was a cat too. Ruby smiled at the back of Angela's head. Someone whispered. Ruby sat down. What a coincidence, murmured Miss Hart. Now I want you to even look at the teacher and the friends. Are they all starting to notice something? Do they all look a little fed up or a little frustrated with what they're beginning to notice? Could they be noticing that Ruby doesn't do anything that someone else didn't do first, mainly Angela? Angela scribbled something on a piece of paper and she passed it to Ruby. The note said, you copied me. I'm telling Miss Hart. P.S. I hate your hair that way. Why is Angela so frustrated? Ruby buried her chin in the collar of her blouse. A big tear rolled down her nose and plopped onto the note. When the bell rang, Miss Hart sent everyone home, except Ruby. So Angela's feeling some feelings, and she said some things to Ruby about how she's feeling. Was she really nice about the way she said those things, or did she let her frustration speak? And because she let her frustration speak and she was trying to get a message across, it had an effect on Ruby. But is that what she wanted to happen? Or did she just want Ruby to stop copying her? Miss Hart closed the door of the classroom and she sat on the edge of Ruby's desk. Ruby, dear, she said gently, you don't need to copy everything Angela does. You can be anything you want to be, but be Ruby first. I like Ruby. Miss Hart smiled at Ruby. Ruby smiled at Mrs. Hart's beautiful polished fingernails. Have a nice weekend, said Miss Hart. Have a nice weekend, said Ruby. Let's see. Let's get a little closer. On Monday morning, Miss Hart said, I hope everyone had a pleasant weekend. I did. I went to the opera. Miss Hart looked around the room. Does anyone have something to share? Ruby waved her hand, and glued to every finger was a pink plastic fingernail. I went to the opera too, said Ruby. She did not, whispered Angela. Mrs. Hart folded her hands and looked very serious. Ruby, dear, said Miss Hart gently, did you do anything else this weekend? So can you see her fingernails are all done up like Mrs. Hart's? And look at Angela. Angela's fed up. But Miss Hart is going to give her a chance. Ruby peeled off a fingernail. I hopped, said Ruby. The class giggled. Ruby's ears turned red. But I did. I hopped around the picnic table 10 times. Ruby looked around the room. Watch. Let's see, maybe we're finding out something finally that Ruby could do. Ruby sprang from her desk. She hopped forward, she hopped backwards, she hopped sideways with both eyes shut. So what are we finding out? Ruby is good at hopping when she's being herself. The class cheered and clapped their hands to the beat of Ruby's feet. Ruby was the best hopper they had ever seen. Miss Hart turned on the tape player and said, follow the leader, do the Ruby hop. So Ruby led the class around the room while everyone copied her. At noon, Ruby and Angela hopped home for lunch. Good things happen when we are being ourselves. The end. Ruby.